To save him, she must return to the man who broke her. Leo worked in a place where time did not behave like it did in the outside world. The workshop was buried between abandoned storefronts near the edge of the harbor, its windows always slightly fogged from salt air and dust. Inside, hundreds of mechanical clocks covered every surface, shelves layered with brass gears, cracked glass domes, dismantled pockets of time waiting to be repaired or forgotten. Leo did not think of it as clutter. He thought of it as memory that still had a purpose. Each ticking mechanism created a soft layered rhythm that replaced silence, because silence, for him, was something heavier than noise. He was alone most days, and he preferred it that way. Alone meant control. Alone meant nothing broke unless he allowed it to be fixed. Outside, the ocean pressed against the city like a slow breath that never stopped. But inside the workshop, everything was precise, measured, and contained. Leo was repairing a small brass chronometer when the bell above the door rang for the first time in days. He did not look up immediately. He assumed it was a mistake, a draft, or someone who would realize quickly that this was not a place for casual entry. But then he heard footsteps. Careful, uneven footsteps, as if the person was negotiating with pain rather than distance. When he finally raised his eyes, he saw her. Sarah stood in the doorway like someone who had forgotten how to fully occupy space. She held a small wooden box wrapped in cloth against her chest, as if it was fragile enough to break just from being looked at. Her posture was controlled but not natural, one leg slightly stiff. Weight shifted in a way that suggested old injury and newer reluctance to admit it. Leo noticed details before meaning. The tension in her jaw was a familiar alignment, but her hands were different, fingers curled as if trying to maintain a grip on an invisible bar. Leo's own hands, usually steady as the granite foundation, felt slick with a cold, uncharacteristic sweat. He tried to grip a pair of brass tweezers, but the metal slid against his skin, a small, humiliating betrayal of his own body. He wiped his palms on his oil-stained apron, the scent of old grease and stale coffee filling his lungs, a sharp reminder that despite the clocks, he was still rotting at the same pace as the rest of the world. She breathed in measured counts, a habit from the stage that now served only to mask the tremor in her shoulders. Sarah did not apologize for entering. She simply stepped inside, as if the decision had already cost her something and turning back would cost more. "I was told you repair things that others give up on," she said. Her voice was steady but carried exhaustion underneath it, like a dancer speaking after the stage has gone dark for the last time. Leo did not answer immediately. He looked at the box instead. Old wood, polished by handling, edges softened by years. Something inside it mattered more than it should have. "That depends on what you consider broken," he finally said. Sarah hesitated, then placed the box carefully on his workbench, avoiding contact with any scattered tools. When she opened it, the air in the workshop seemed to shift. Inside was an antique clock, hand-carved casing, delicate metalwork, frozen hands that refused to move. It was not just stopped. It felt abandoned. "It belonged to my grandmother," Sarah said. "It stopped the day she died. No one has been able to fix it." Leo leaned closer, not touching it yet. The mechanism was old, but not beyond repair. What was unusual was the wear pattern, as if someone had tried to force time backward instead of forward. "Why bring it here?" he asked. Sarah's gaze dropped briefly to her knee, as if the question physically touched something painful. "Because I cannot stand silence anymore," she said. It was not a dramatic confession. It was factual. That made it heavier. Leo finally picked up the clock. The moment he did, something small inside him reacted, not emotionally, but mechanically, like a gear shifting into an unfamiliar position. He did not like that feeling. He placed the clock down again with controlled care. "It is reparable," he said. "But not quickly." Sarah nodded as if she had expected that answer. She did not smile. She did not relax. Instead, she looked around the workshop at the crowded walls of ticking lives that did not belong to her. "I can come back," she said. Leo almost told her not to. Almost told her to leave it and forget it like everyone else did. But something about the way she stood there suggested she already lived in a kind of forgetting that was not voluntary. "Suit yourself," he said instead. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Sarah returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time she arrived, she carried less hesitation and more silence. Leo noticed she was learning the space around her body again. testing limits like someone returning from a long absence. She did not speak much at first. She simply watched him work. The clock slowly began to change under his hands, not repaired yet, but no longer completely dead. The second hand twitched like a memory, trying to reassert itself. Sarah started talking in fragments. About the house she had inherited from her grandmother. About rooms that felt too large for one person. About a life that used to exist in movement and applause, now reduced to stillness and pain management. Leo did not ask about the details of her past. He was not interested in stories. He was interested in mechanisms, and people, he believed, were too unpredictable to be fixed in the same way. But he listened anyway, because her voice filled the workshop differently than the clocks did. Not louder, just more human. One afternoon, while adjusting a gear so small it almost disappeared between his fingers, Leo said without looking up, "You used to move differently." Sarah went still. "What do you mean?" she asked. He finally looked at her. "Your body remembers something it is not doing anymore." There was a long pause. Then Sarah gave a short, humorless exhale that might have been a laugh if it had not been so carefully controlled. "I was a dancer," she said. The words did not invite questions. They ended them. But Leo did not respond with pity or curiosity. He simply nodded once, as if that explained a structural detail he had already suspected. Outside, the ocean kept moving, indifferent and endless. Inside the workshop, the clock on his table ticked once, then again, as if deciding whether it was ready to return to time. Sarah started coming not because the clock demanded it, but because the silence of her grandmother's house did. It filled every room without effort, pressing into walls, into breath, into thought. She tried to move through it like she used to move through space on stage, but her body no longer obeyed memory cleanly. The knee pain returned in waves, sharp reminders that her past career had not ended politely. It had collapsed. At Leo's workshop, silence behaved differently. It was not empty. It was structured, interrupted constantly by the layered ticking of dozens of mechanisms. Sarah began to notice that difference. At first, she only observed, standing near the door longer than necessary, as if crossing the threshold required negotiation with herself. Then she started arriving earlier, staying longer. Not because she had a plan, but because leaving meant returning to something heavier. Leo did not change his routine for her. He worked as if she was part of the environment now, like dust or light. He did not ask her more questions about the dancer she used to be. That information stayed where she had placed it, on the table between them, acknowledged but not opened. Instead, he focused on the clock. Each day the mechanism responded differently. Not fixed, not restored, but slowly reassembled into possibility. A faint resistance in the gears loosened. A subtle alignment returned. It was not progress in the sense of completion, but in the sense of re-entry into function. Leo treated it like that only. Function. Nothing more. Sarah began speaking more freely without invitation. Not about trauma, but about structure. She described ballet the way Leo described machines. Lines, balance, weight distribution, control through invisible corrections. When she spoke like that, her voice changed. It stopped sounding like recovery and started sounding like precision. One afternoon, she watched him replace a microscopic spring and said, "You treat broken things like they still have rules." Leo didn't look up. "They do. That's not what people say about me," she replied. That made him pause for the first time. A fraction of stillness that did not belong to habit. "People are not reliable narrators," he said. Sarah leaned slightly closer to the bench, careful not to touch anything. "Neither are bodies," she said. That exchange did not become emotional. It did not soften into comfort. It simply stayed in the air longer than usual, like a mechanism that refused to settle into its final position. Days passed. The clock began to show small signs of life. A delayed tick. A hesitant movement of the minute hand. Nothing consistent, but enough to suggest that it was no longer fully static. Sarah noticed this before Leo acknowledged it. She stared at it one morning as if it had insulted her. "It's trying," she said. Leo adjusted a tool. "It's resisting less." Same thing. No. That was the extent of the explanation. Outside the workshop, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Boats came and went. People passed without remembering the building existed. Inside, something else was forming, not between them as a declared connection, but a shared repetition. Arrival. Observation. Departure delayed. Return. Sarah began to bring coffee sometimes, not as an offering, but as a correction to the absence of warmth she started to notice only after spending time there. Leo never thanked her. He simply drank it when it was placed near his tools, as if it had always belonged in that position. The coffee was cheap, burnt, and left a bitter film on his tongue that cut through the metallic tang of the workshop. Sarah sat on a crate that hadn't been dusted in years, the hem of her coat picking up gray lint. She didn't look like a ballerina then. She looked like a tired woman in a drafty room, her hair messy from the harbor wind, smelling of salt and damp wool. One day, Sarah asked without preface, "Do you ever fix things that can't be fixed?" Leo answered immediately, "No." She nodded slowly. "That's honest. It's practical." Sarah looked down at her knee when she shifted her weight. "I used to believe the body was honest too," she said. "Turns out it lies. Or breaks without asking permission." Leo finally looked at her directly. "It doesn't lie," he said. "It just changes rules." That sentence stayed with her longer than anything else he had said. Later that day, she stood near the door longer than usual before leaving. The clock behind her emitted a clear tick, slightly more stable than before. She turned back once, not at Leo, but at the workshop itself, as if memorizing a place that was becoming harder to leave without noticing. Leo did not watch her go immediately. He continued working until the sound of her footsteps disappeared. Only then did he pause for a fraction of time longer than necessary. Not emotion, not reflection, just interruption and routine. Summer arrived without announcing itself. The air around the harbor changed first, less salt-heavy, more warm, carrying the smell of sand and old wood. The town near Coney Island shifted into a slower rhythm, where even movement seemed optional. Leo's workshop stayed the same, but the light inside it changed angle, falling differently across the clocks like a quiet recalibration of the room. Sarah began arriving without hesitation now. She no longer stood at the door for long pauses. She entered as if the space had started to accept her presence. Her walking improved slightly on good days, though the knee pain never disappeared. It only learned to hide under control. She stopped treating it like an obstacle and started treating it like a condition she could negotiate with. Leo noticed changes without naming them. He noticed she no longer scanned the room as if she might need to escape it. He noticed she began to choose the same place to stand, near the left side of the workbench where the light was softer. He noticed she stopped looking at the exit first. The clock they were repairing had reached a new stage. It no longer stalled completely. It resisted in smaller ways now. Hesitations between seconds, slight irregularities in rhythm, as if remembering how to function but not trusting it fully. Leo did not rush it. He treated it like a system rebuilding trust in its own structure. Sarah started talking about places outside the workshop more often. Not her past, but the present she was slowly re-entering. The beach, the empty mornings, the sound of waves that did not demand performance. She said it like she was testing whether these things were still available to her. One morning, she stood by the open door and said, "It feels different here in summer." Leo didn't look up from his work. "Everything feels different in summer." "That's not what I mean." He paused slightly. "Then say what you mean." Sarah hesitated, then stepped fully inside instead of staying at the threshold. "It doesn't feel like I'm waiting for something to end." That statement stayed in the room longer than either of them reacted to it. Leo adjusted a gear. "Most people are waiting for something to end," he said. "Are you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. The tool in his hand remained still for a moment longer than necessary. "No," he said finally. "I'm waiting for things not to break again." Sarah nodded slowly, as if that distinction made sense in a way she didn't expect. After that, their days began to overlap more naturally. They would walk to the beach once or twice a week without planning it in advance. Early mornings, before the crowd. The sand still cool, the ocean flat and indifferent. Sarah walked slightly ahead, adjusting her pace without admitting she was adjusting it. Leo followed at a steady distance that never changed. They did not talk much during those walks. The silence between them no longer felt like a void. It had developed its own internal logic, steady and predictable as the escapement of a well-tuned timepiece. One morning, Sarah stopped near the waterline and watched the horizon for a long time. "I used to think movement was everything," she said quietly. Leo stood a few steps behind her. "It is," he replied. She turned slightly. "Not anymore." "That time." He looked at her directly. "Then what is it now?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. The waves filled the pause. Then she said, "Something I have to learn again." That was the closest she had come to admitting uncertainty without framing it as loss. Back at the workshop later that day, the clock finally completed a full, uninterrupted minute cycle. No hesitation, no correction, just movement through time as if it had always been doing it correctly. Sarah noticed it first. She didn't speak. She simply pointed. Leo looked at it for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "It's stable," he said. "Does that mean it's fixed?" she asked. "No," he replied. "It means it's ready to be tested." Outside, the harbor light shifted again as the afternoon moved forward. Inside, something between them had also shifted, though neither of them named it yet. The man arrived on a day that looked like any other day. The workshop door opened without hesitation, without the uneven pause Sarah used when she entered. The sound was controlled, deliberate, familiar with spaces like this. Julian stepped inside as if he had always belonged in places where everything was measured. Expensive fabric, clean lines, posture trained by stages and audiences. He did not look around with curiosity. He looked around with evaluation. Sarah froze before she even turned fully. Her body reacted before her thoughts did. Not pain this time, but recognition. The kind that pulls old structure back into place even when it no longer fits. Leo noticed the shift immediately. Not the identity, but the interruption in Sarah's rhythm. Her breathing changed. Her stance tightened. Something in her that had been slowly unlearning tension suddenly remembered how to hold it. "Sarah," Julian said, as if the name still belonged to him. She didn't correct him. That silence was already an answer. Leo stayed where he was, tools in hand. No movement toward greeting. No movement toward retreat. Just observation. Julian's gaze moved to Leo last, intentionally. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said to Sarah. Not a question, a correction of distance. Sarah exhaled slowly. "I'm not hiding." Julian gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You left without telling anyone. That's usually called hiding in my world." Leo set the tool down. Not aggressively. Precisely. Like closing a circuit. "This is a workshop," Leo said. "Not a stage." Julian finally looked at him fully. The evaluation became sharper. "Interesting," he said. "I was expecting something more romanticized. Dust, isolation, broken clocks. You have all of it." Sarah stepped slightly forward. "Julian, why are you here?" That question changed the temperature in the room. Not emotionally. Structurally. Julian didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly past a shelf of clocks, not touching anything, but close enough that his presence felt like measurement. "Because your absence became noticeable," he said. "And because people like you don't disappear without consequences." Leo watched Sarah, not Julian. The reaction mattered more than the trigger. Sarah's jaw tightened. "I'm not coming back." Julian stopped walking. "That's not how it works," he said softly. Silence followed. Not Leo's silence. Not Sarah's silence. Something imposed. Julian turned slightly toward Leo again. "And you are?" Leo didn't react to the provocation. "Someone who fixes things," he said. Julian nodded as if confirming a theory. "Of course." Sarah stepped between them slightly, not fully, but enough to interrupt alignment. "Don't," she said quietly. Not to Leo. Not to Julian. To the situation itself. Julian's expression softened in a controlled way. "I came to offer you something practical," he said to Sarah. "A return. Stability. A place where your talent still matters." Sarah laughed once, but it had no humor in it. "My talent stopped being useful to you the moment I stopped performing for you." That statement did not provoke anger. It refined Julian's focus. "I didn't come here to argue," he said. "I'm here because your current trajectory is inefficient. I don't like seeing assets go to waste in rooms filled with dust." Leo's attention shifted slightly. That word, mistake, did not belong in this space. Sarah's voice lowered. "Leaving you wasn't a mistake." Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, smaller this time. "We'll see." He turned toward the exit as if the conversation was already resolved in his favor. But before leaving, he paused at the door. "I'll be in town for a while," he said casually. "In case you change your mind." Then he left. The door closed. The workshop returned to its layered ticking. But the rhythm had changed. Not broken. Disturbed. Sarah didn't move for several seconds. Leo didn't speak. He observed the adjustment in her posture, subtle collapse of something held too long. "Finally," she said, "I thought that was over." Leo answered without softness. Nothing is over until it is stopped properly. That sentence landed differently than comfort. It landed like structure. Sarah looked at the clock on the bench, the one they had been repairing. It continued to tick, but for the first time in days, she didn't hear stability in it. She heard interruption. Julian did not return immediately, but his presence remained in the space around Sarah like a residual pressure. It changed how she entered rooms. It changed how long she stayed in silence. It changed the way she looked at doors, as if expecting them to open without warning. Leo noticed the change in smaller increments than Sarah did herself. She began to arrive slightly earlier than usual, then slightly later, as if her internal rhythm had been disrupted. She stopped standing in the same place in the workshop. She moved more. Not freely, but unsettled. The clock on the workbench also responded to this shift. Its stability, which had reached near completion, began to show micro-irregularities again. Not failure, not collapse, just inconsistency, like a system reacting to external noise. Leo adjusted it once, then stopped adjusting it. Some problems, he understood, were not mechanical. Sarah spoke less about the beach, less about movement, more about gaps in memory she did not choose to revisit but found herself circling anyway. Julian's presence had not created new wounds. It had reopened old structure. One afternoon, she stood near the bench without touching anything and said, "He always used to talk like everything had a correct version." Leo didn't ask who she meant. "Some people think control is the same as correctness," he said. Sarah nodded slowly. With him, it wasn't just belief. It was enforcement. That word stayed in the air longer than expected. Leo looked at her. "He doesn't control you now," he said. Sarah gave a short, restrained breath. Not directly. That distinction mattered, and both of them understood it without expanding it into explanation. Outside, the harbor shifted into late summer heat. The workshop felt smaller, not physically, but structurally, as if the space was accommodating something it had not been designed for. Julian's second appearance happened without announcement again. This time, he didn't enter the workshop. He waited outside. Sarah saw him first through the glass, standing near the edge of the street, as if he belonged to the city more than the building did. She didn't move immediately. Leo noticed her pause and followed her gaze. He saw Julian, but did not react. Sarah stepped outside. Leo did not stop her. He simply watched. The conversation between them was not audible from inside, but it was visible in structure. Julian spoke first. Sarah responded with shorter intervals between words than before, then longer pauses, then a shift in posture. When Sarah returned inside, her expression was controlled but altered, not broken, redirected. "He made an offer," she said. Leo didn't respond immediately. "What kind of offer?" Sarah hesitated. "A way out for you." That was the first time Leo's stillness changed in a noticeable way. Not emotion, precision. "He wants you to leave?" he asked. Sarah looked down. "He wants me to come back." Silence followed. The clocks continued their layered ticking, but it no longer felt like background. It felt like measurement. Leo walked to the workbench and adjusted nothing. "And you?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer right away. Her hand touched the edge of the table, but did not grip it. "I don't know," she said finally. That was the first honest fracture in their structure. Not conflict. Uncertainty. Leo nodded once, slowly. "Then you are already being moved," he said. Sarah looked at him sharply. "That's not fair." "It's not about fairness," Leo replied. "It's about pressure." The word landed heavily. Not as accusation, as diagnosis. Sarah turned away from the bench. "I can't just ignore him," she said. Leo's voice stayed steady. "Ignoring him is not the same as resisting him." That distinction remained unresolved. That night, after Sarah left, Leo stayed longer than usual. The workshop was quieter without her presence, but not empty. He looked at the clock they had been repairing. It was still working, still unstable, still close to completion. He did not touch it. Instead, he began disassembling a different mechanism entirely, one unrelated to the current work. A reset, a separate structure. Outside, the ocean continued its indifferent motion. Inside, something had shifted from repair to anticipation. The tension did not escalate loudly. It accumulated, quietly, structurally, like pressure building inside a sealed mechanism that no one was actively watching. Sarah stopped arriving with the same consistency. Not fully absent, but irregular. Some days she came early and stayed too long. Other days she did not come at all, then returned the next day as if continuity had not been broken. Leo did not ask why. He did not correct the pattern. He simply continued working, though his focus shifted more often than before. The clock on the bench remained partially stable, but never fully returned to its earlier precision. Something external had entered its system, and it no longer trusted time in the same way. Sarah began speaking differently when she did appear. Shorter sentences, more pauses, less description of her internal state, more observation of external pressure. Julian was no longer just a presence. He had become an active variable. One afternoon, she said without sitting down, "He knows where I stay now." Leo looked up, and Sarah hesitated. "And he keeps saying it doesn't matter where I go." That statement changed nothing on the surface, but it tightened the structure of the room. Leo set down his tool. "It matters if you let it matter," he said. Sarah gave a sharp exhale. "That's not how pressure works." He didn't disagree. There was a long pause. The clocks continued ticking in layered rhythm, but the sound felt less like order and more like accumulation. Sarah finally said, "He offered to relocate the workshop lease." Leo's hands stopped completely. That was the first direct structural threat. Not emotional, not relational, practical. "He can't do that," Leo said. Sarah shook her head slightly. "He already started the process. He didn't just talk to the landlord. He bought the entire block's debt last month. For him, this building isn't a landmark. It's a line item he can cross out whenever he wants." Silence followed again, but different now. Heavier. Defined. Leo walked to the far shelf, not toward her, and adjusted nothing. His movements were controlled, but sharper. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah's voice lowered. "Because I didn't want you to find out when it was already gone." That sentence redefined the situation more than the action itself. Leo turned slightly toward her. "And what does he want in return?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was the answer. "He wants me to leave with him," she said finally. Leo nodded once. Not acceptance, not surprise, recognition. "And you're considering it," he said. Sarah didn't deny it. That silence became the most important moment since Julian first appeared. Leo looked at the clock again. It ticked. Stable. But now stability meant nothing. Stability was no longer safety. It was timing. "If you leave," Leo said quietly, "this stops being reparable." Sarah looked at him. "The clock." "No," he said. "Everything." That was not a threat. It was a conclusion based on structure. Sarah stepped closer to the bench for the first time in days. Her hand hovered near the clock, but did not touch it. "I didn't ask for this," she said. Leo answered without emotion. "No one does." Another pause. Longer. Then Sarah said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to choose." Leo finally met her gaze directly. "Then don't choose under pressure," he said. Outside, somewhere in the city, a distant sound echoed. Indistinct, irrelevant, but enough to remind that the workshop was not isolated from consequence. Inside, the clock completed another full cycle. Clean. Precise. But neither of them trusted it anymore. Julian did not need to enter the workshop to change its structure anymore. His influence had already settled into the decisions that were not yet made. That was how pressure worked when it was patient. It did not push constantly. It waited for internal weakness. Sarah began arriving with visible tension already present in her body, as if she had carried conversations with her before stepping inside. Her movements were no longer exploratory. They were controlled in a defensive way. Even standing near the bench required effort. Leo noticed that she no longer looked at the clock first. She looked at exits, then at him, then at the floor. The order mattered. He did not ask her what Julian had said each time she came. He understood enough from absence of stability. One evening, Sarah spoke before Leo did anything else. He said, "If I stay here, I'm choosing isolation over reality." Leo didn't respond immediately. He continued adjusting a gear, but his movements slowed. "That's not reality," he said finally. Sarah gave a short, tired laugh. "To him it is." Leo placed the tool down. "Then his reality depends on control." Sarah nodded slightly. "Everything with him does." Silence followed. The clocks filled it, but differently now. Their rhythm no longer felt like harmony. It felt like measurement under observation. Sarah moved closer to the bench, then stopped. Her knees shifted slightly under weight, and she steadied herself without asking for help. She didn't just stand there. She reached out and picked up a heavy iron vise from the edge of the table, moving it to the other side with a sudden, violent efficiency that surprised even Leo. Her breath hitched, but she didn't let go until the iron hit the wood with a dull thud. "I'm tired of being the thing everyone is trying to calibrate," she snapped, her eyes finally burning with something other than exhaustion. That detail mattered more than words. "He knows about the clock," she said. Leo looked up. "How?" "He saw me here," she replied. "He asked what I was bringing to life instead of going back to mine." That phrasing carried intent, not curiosity. Leo turned his attention fully to her. "And what did you say?" Sarah hesitated. "I didn't answer." That silence was more dangerous than any response. Leo walked to the clock. He didn't touch it immediately. He observed it. The mechanism was still functioning, but its consistency had degraded again. Not broken, disturbed. "He's not interested in the clock," Leo said. Sarah looked at him. "Then what is he interested in?" Leo answered without hesitation. "Replacing what you choose with what he approves of." That statement was not emotional. It was structural. Sarah's voice dropped. "He offered to settle everything if I returned for one season." Leo finally touched the clock, but only briefly, like confirming temperature. "And you're still here?" he said. Sarah didn't answer immediately. That delay contained the entire conflict. Outside, the harbor wind shifted slightly, pushing sound against the workshop walls. Inside, nothing moved except the ticking mechanisms and the slow recalibration of decisions not yet finalized. Sarah finally said, "I don't want to lose you because I can't fight him properly." Leo's response came slower this time. "Then don't fight him on his terms." Sarah shook her head. "He doesn't leave other terms." Leo looked at her directly. "Everyone has limits," he said. That sentence changed the air again. Not comfort, not solution, just boundary recognition. Sarah stepped back slightly, as if that idea itself required distance. For the first time, the clock stopped hesitating completely. It resumed perfect rhythm for several seconds, then continued without deviation. Neither of them commented on it, because now stability no longer meant peace. It meant that something was about to be tested. The testing began without announcement. 2 days after Sarah's last conversation with Leo, she did not arrive in the morning. The workshop remained open, unchanged, but the absence was immediate in a way neither of them had previously acknowledged. The space did not feel empty. It felt uncorrected. The door opened at noon, but it wasn't Sarah. Julian walked in alone, his silhouette cutting through the dust motes like a blade. He didn't look at the clocks. He looked at the walls, tapping a knuckle against a support beam as if checking for rot. But as he leaned over the bench, Leo saw a twitch in Julian's eyelid, a rhythmic, involuntary shudder that broke the mask of his expensive composure. For all his talk of assets and trajectories, Julian looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his knuckles white where he gripped his cane. "I've seen the paperwork for this place," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of the performance he saved for Sarah. "The wiring is a fire hazard, and the foundation is shifting toward the harbor. You're not a craftsman, Leo. You're a squatter in a dying building." Leo didn't stop his work. "The building holds. That's enough for me." Julian leaned over the workbench, his expensive sleeve brushing against a pile of gears. "I'm not here to argue aesthetics. I'm here to tell you that by Friday, the power will be cut. If Sarah is still here when the lights go out, that's on you. Don't be the reason she ends up in the dark again." Leo worked through the morning without interruption. He adjusted small mechanisms, cleaned parts, assembled nothing new. His focus was precise, but the rhythm of his work had changed. Not slower, more deliberate, as if each action required confirmation that the structure still held. At midday, Sarah appeared, not entering fully at first. She stood in the doorway longer than she had in weeks. That alone told Leo everything he needed to know. Julian had spoken again. She stepped inside only after a long pause. Her face was controlled, but not calm. There was a tension in her jaw that did not belong to physical pain. "He's closing it," she said. Leo didn't ask what it meant. Sarah continued. "The lease, the workshop, everything. He says it's already finalized if I don't agree by the end of the week." Leo placed a tool down slowly. No reaction beyond that. "That's not legal timing," he said. Sarah gave a short, bitter breath. "It doesn't matter. He already made it real on paper." Silence followed. The clocks kept ticking, but their rhythm felt irrelevant now. Leo walked to the bench where the clock sat. It was still functioning, but its stability had become almost too perfect. like a system compensating for instability elsewhere. He's forcing convergence, Leo said. Sarah looked at him. What does that mean? It means he's removing options until only one remains. That sentence landed heavier than anything emotional could have. Sarah turned slightly away. And what is the one option? Leo didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already visible in the structure of events. Return or collapse. Sarah seemed to understand that without hearing it. He wants me back in his world, she said quietly. And he's using you to make it clean. Leo's expression didn't change. I'm not part of his world. Sarah shook her head. That's not how he sees it. A long pause followed. Then Sarah said, I can stop it. Leo looked at her. How? She hesitated. That hesitation mattered more than the words. If I agree, she said, he releases everything. The room did not change, but the structure of it did. Leo nodded slowly. Not acceptance, not surprise, just confirmation of pattern completion. So that's the offer, he said. Sarah didn't correct him. The clock on the bench ticked steadily. Too steadily, as if unaware of the shift in human variables around it. Leo finally spoke. Then you already know the price. Sarah's voice dropped. I don't want to lose this. Leo looked at her directly. Keeping a shop open isn't the same as winning, Sarah. Sometimes you just own a room full of broken parts. That statement hit differently now. Not as philosophy, as separation. Sarah stepped closer to the bench, but did not touch anything. Her presence near the clock felt like proximity to decision rather than object. I don't know if I can resist him again, she admitted. Leo nodded once. Then don't pretend this is about resistance. Sarah looked at him sharply. He continued. It's about which parts of yourself you're willing to strip for parts to keep the rest of the machine running. That sentence stayed suspended longer than anything else in the room. Outside, the harbor sound rose slightly, wind pressing against structure. Inside, the clock completed another cycle, perfectly on time, as if timing itself had become irrelevant to what was happening around it. The decision did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as erosion. Sarah stopped sleeping properly, not because of fear in the traditional sense, but because her thoughts no longer settled into rest. Every option she considered folded back into Julian's structure of control. Every alternative carried a consequence she could not isolate. The workshop became her only place where thought did not immediately turn into pressure. But even there, the pressure followed her now, quieter but present, like something waiting just outside the range of attention. Leo noticed the change without comment. She no longer observed the clocks with curiosity. She observed them with distance, as if they represented a version of stability she could no longer access. The clock on the bench was now fully stable. Perfect rhythm. No hesitation. No deviation. It had become what it was supposed to be, and yet neither of them treated it as success anymore. Because stability had stopped meaning safety. One afternoon, Sarah stood longer than usual without speaking. Leo continued working, but slower than before. He already knew something was coming. Finally, she said, I agreed to his condition. The sentence did not break the room. It finalized it. Leo stopped moving for a moment. Not emotionally. Structurally. He releases the workshop if I return with him, she added. Silence followed. The clocks continued ticking. Layered, unchanged. But now they felt separate from the conversation, as if time itself had detached from consequence. Leo placed his tools down carefully. When, he asked. End of the week, Sarah said. That detail mattered less than the fact that she had already crossed the internal threshold. The decision had already happened before words were spoken. Leo nodded once. So this is not a negotiation anymore. Sarah shook her head slightly. No. A pause. Then she added, quieter, I didn't see another way. Leo looked at her for a long moment. Not judging. Measuring the structure of what remained. There is always another way, he said. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Not with him. That statement was not emotional. It was conditioned. Leo turned toward the clock. The perfectly stable mechanism. He watched it for a long time. Then he said, he didn't beat you. He reduced your options until you accepted his frame. Sarah didn't respond. That silence confirmed it. Leo finally spoke again. If you leave like this, you are not choosing him. Sarah looked at him. You are choosing to end the conflict by removing yourself from it, he said. That distinction landed heavily. Sarah whispered, what's the difference? Leo answered without hesitation. One is surrender. The other is survival. A long silence followed. For the first time, The clock's perfect ticking felt too clean, too detached, as if it no longer belonged to the emotional reality of the room. Sarah stepped back slowly. I don't want this to be the end, she said. Leo didn't move closer. Then don't make it one, he replied. But neither of them said how. Outside, the harbor continued its indifferent movement. Inside, something had reached structural completion. Not resolution, not peace, just the point where no further delay was possible. The last day arrived without clarity, only finality. The kind that does not announce itself as change, but as the absence of alternatives. Sarah came to the workshop earlier than usual. The light was still cold, the harbor quiet, the clocks inside the room already layered into their familiar rhythm. Nothing in the space had changed physically, but everything felt pre-aligned toward departure. Leo was already working when she entered. He did not look up immediately. He recognized her presence without needing confirmation. Sarah stood at the door longer this time, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness that crossing it meant closing something behind her permanently. Finally, she stepped inside. I'm leaving today, she said. Leo did not stop working. I know. That response removed any remaining ambiguity. Sarah walked closer to the bench, but did not sit. Her hand hovered near the clock they had repaired together. It was still perfectly stable, still precise, still alive in the mechanical sense. I didn't want it to end like this, she said. Leo set down his tools slowly. No sudden motion, no resistance. Most things don't end the way people want, he said. Sarah exhaled. I know. Silence followed. Not tense. Defined. Leo finally turned to her fully. He will keep his word, he said. Sarah nodded. He already has people preparing the transfer. That detail confirmed what both of them already understood. The structure had already shifted outside their control. Sarah looked at the workshop one more time. The clocks, the shelves, the quiet density of repaired time. I used to think I was broken, she said. Leo didn't interrupt. But I think I just stopped fitting the system I was in, she continued. Leo nodded once. That's not the same thing. Sarah's eyes tightened slightly. No. A pause. Then she said, quieter, you were the first place where I didn't feel like I had to fit anything. Leo didn't respond immediately. That sentence carried weight that was not mechanical, not structural. Something outside his usual language. He finally said, you adapted here. Sarah gave a small, controlled nod. And now I have to adapt somewhere else. That was the cleanest version of the truth available in the situation. She stepped back from the bench. The clock remained untouched. She looked at the brass casing one last time. It was hers, the only thing she had left of her grandmother, but she didn't reach for it. If she took it back into Julian's world, it would only stop again. Here, in the layered ticking of the workshop, it had a chance to stay alive. Perfect. Stable. Irrelevant to what was happening beyond it. At the door, she stopped once more. Do you think things can stay fixed? She asked. Leo looked at the workshop, not at her. No, he said. A pause. Then he added, but they can be maintained. Sarah nodded slowly. That distinction mattered more than comfort. She turned to leave. This time, Leo spoke once more before she reached the street. Don't let him make you forget what you chose, he said. Sarah did not turn back, but her voice came after a pause. I won't. The door closed. The workshop remained. The clocks continued ticking. Perfectly aligned. Perfectly indifferent. Leo didn't stand still. He went to the door and locked it, the heavy bolt rasping in its socket. He walked back to the bench and picked up the clock Sarah had left. It was still ticking, a perfect, lonely sound in the cooling air. Leo didn't just shove it. He felt a sudden, hot surge of loathing for the perfect, rhythmic ticking of the machine. With a jagged motion, he slammed the clock onto the back shelf, the glass dome rattling dangerously against the wood. He wanted to break it, to snap the mainspring and end the mockery of its precision. Instead, he just left it there in the dark, his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps that didn't follow any rules of timing. He picked up his loop, but his vision was blurred. He didn't start on the next broken thing immediately. He just sat there in the locked room, listening to the silence he had spent his whole life trying to outrun.